I'm Trevor Spath. I'm a sophomore at Waverly High School and an FFA member, and I'm interviewing Dave from West Blue Farms. First off, could you share a little bit of background about your operation?
Well, Deb and I, we were married in 1980, and I actually started farming a couple years before that, so we've been at it a while. We have a certified organic operation with all of our crops, which we grow corn, beans, wheat, oats, and alfalfa. We haven't certified any of our livestock, which we have a cow-calf operation, about 30, 40 head, and we raise about 4,000 broiler chickens and just started raising a few hogs, and we direct market all of our livestock from us direct to the consumer. The crop ground consists of around 800 acres, pretty diverse rotation, and that's kind of the gist of the operation.
What is the philosophy behind your farm?
Well, as being certified organic, kind of the reason we went that route, I guess philosophy is we just thought we could take better care of the soil that way by not using some of the chemical inputs. And then actually we were just part of an EQIP project in which it was a nutrient management project. So we soil tested all of the farms or all of the different fields. And from when we started farming until now, which has been 20, 30 years, all the fields now test up in the 3 to 4% organic matter range. So we've probably raised the organic matter about 1 full percentage point. So we feel like we've been successful in improving the soil over that amount of time. And so that's been the main thing, just trying to, partly for our human health, not having to handle the chemicals. That when we started doing that in the probably late 80s, it was just, well, I really enjoyed the freedom of that because we weren't having to, mix chemicals, use gloves, put on masks, things like that. We could just go out and plant and harvest and not worry so much about the chemicals that we had been using.
What crops do you raise?
Yeah, we have corn, beans, wheat, oats, and alfalfa in like an 8-year rotation. We'll plant like corn beans for 4 years. Then we'll plant a small grain, usually wheat or oats. And then after that is harvested in July, then we'll plant alfalfa in August and have alfalfa for 3 years.
How important is biodiversity to your operation?
Yeah, just our crop rotation alone creates a lot of diversity on the farm compared to just alternating corn and soybeans. And then with the livestock and the pasture, we've used it last 4 years now. We've always used rotational grazing. Now we've gone to kind of a high density stock grazing or mob grazing. So the cattle will be on one piece of the pasture for maybe a half a day or a day, and then they're moved. And so that piece of ground can rest for 30 to 90 days before we come back. So it gives a chance for, wildlife to reproduce and things like that.
What is included in your cow's typical feed ration?
Most of the time it's pasture, during the growing season. And then as we get crops harvested, we'll move it to, corn stalks, even sometimes alfalfa fields that have a little bit of regrowth. We do rent some ground from the neighbors, mostly corn stalks that we'll run them on. And in the wintertime, we do feed some hay if the snow gets too deep or if we run out of stalks. And then when we finish out the cattle, we'll typically it's pretty simple ration, just self-feed round bale alfalfa hay, and then we hand feed corn to them, which is usually a transitional or organic corn.
Could you explain a little more detail about the chicken raising aspect of your farm?
Again, we use transitional or organic grains. Try to keep everything non-GMO if it's not certified organic. We don't use any antibiotics or growth hormones with any of our livestock, which that seems to be one of the pluses with direct marketing. That's one of the things our consumers are looking for. But we get the chickens as day-old chicks. They only takes like 7 and 8 weeks, and they're fully grown, and we butcher them. We just use some open front sheds. We'll put some tarps up to keep the drafts down and keep them a little bit warmer as they start, and then we'll remove the tarps as they get bigger and as the weather warms up, and take them up to a locker to get them processed, and then we direct market them.
How do you ensure your animals remain stress-free?
Oh, a lot of it's trying to give them enough space. I mean, the livestock being out on pasture, they've always got plenty of room out there. And we usually don't finish more than 4 to 6 head at a time, and so our lots are big enough that they have plenty of room there. That helps. And chickens are confined to a building. They're not free range, so to speak, as far as outdoor access, but they are able to move around. They're not caged up like factory laying hens are or anything like that. But so a lot of it's just trying to keep good feed in front of them and clean water. Clean water is one of your cheapest feed sources you have, and so that's most of it. Try to keep the stress away from them, and then they're healthier.
How do you manage the animals' diseases?
We just haven't had too many that we've ever had to treat for. Once in a while we'll get a little pink eye in the cattle and we'll have to, maybe give them some antibiotics there, but it's just a one-shot deal. It's not like continuous low-level antibiotic feeding. And the chickens, we've probably really have only ever treated chickens maybe twice in the 20 plus years that we've raised chickens, and that's like 2 groups out of, I don't know, we've probably had 80 to 100 groups of chickens, and we've only ever had to treat 2 of them. So yeah, it's, we really don't vaccinate for anything as far as livestock go, and it's just more just keeping good feed in front of them, and salt and a little mineral, and away they go.
How does the landscape of your property affect the grazing and growing procedures?
Oh, as far as the crop ground, it's mostly on fairly level ground. We do grow crops on some of the terrace ground, but we're actually moving some of the terrace ground back into pastures for the cattle, just because it's a little bit harder to cultivate in an organic system on the hillside slopes. So yeah, so most of the rougher ground's in permanent grass, which keeps it from washing away, and then all of our crop ground is even the flat ground, wherever the water congregates and runs off to the end of the field, we'll have permanent grass waterways there to maintain soil there, so we don't lose any.
Do you do all the work yourself, or do you hire help?
It was my dad, myself, and then as my son grew up, he helped us a lot, and then he graduated and he's a teacher now, so he's not part of the operation. And so then it was just my dad and I, and then we hired for about 5 years now, we've had an extra hired person that was part of it. So we've always had kind of a 3-man operation going, and my wife helped some, and our kids did as we grew up. And 5 years ago, a younger family joined our operation, and then 2 years ago, we actually transferred. We kind of sped up our transition timeline, and they took over all of the cropland that we have, and Deb and I still raise all the livestock, and so then Steve, he's got a hired man, so they're kind of 2 of them taking care of the crops, and then Deb and I take care of the livestock.
What sort of technology do you use?
We don't have any GPS, no auto steer on the tractors. We do still cultivate everything a couple of times, the corn and soybeans. We have a guidance system on the cultivator, so that helps a fair amount. Our planter it's a vacuum planter, which is fairly new technology, and it is probably 10, 15 years old, but it's been around that long, but it's probably still the latest in planting mechanisms. Yeah, some of our equipment's fairly old, but so we don't use a lot of technology. We're actually, in some ways, we're going backwards to farm prior to when chemicals were introduced in the 50s, and yet on other hands, we are using some mechanical innovations that have been created for cultivating and things like that.
What are your typical markets?
All the meat's direct marketed, so we have a list of over 500 customers, and so all of our meat goes to those customers. We don't market through any restaurants or stores or farmers markets. It's all direct to the consumers that we know. The organic grains, the corn and wheat typically gets sold through National Farmers Organization. They have what's called NFO Organics, and they have a guy that specializes in marketing organic grains for us. And our soybeans, we've always sold those to Robert Seed out at Axtell. We've had that relationship from the very beginning and continue to have that. Alfalfa's become a good organic market for us about in the last 5-6 years, and those markets kind of rotate around. We've sold a lot to organic dairies. When the drought hit down in Texas, we were shipping a lot of hay down there. We've shipped some to an organic dairy in Colorado. We sell some to an organic dairy here in Nebraska, and so those are our main markets for the alfalfa.
How are you involved in your community?
Oh, I've been on the local school board for 14 years, and prior to that I was on a country school board for 7 years. We've always been active in the churches that we belong to and serve on different committees there. I don't know, we've enjoyed going on mission trips either within the States or, down to Chile and Haiti and places like that. And so that's some of our different involvements.
What is the most challenging thing about your farm?
Oh, it's really time consuming, especially during the growing season. With a lot of agriculture today, it's plant, spray, and harvest, and if you irrigate. But with us, we have so many different crops that we have to manage, and plus we're doing mechanical cultivation. With alfalfa, you're harvesting from 4 to 5 times a year, so you have to time all that, work around the weather. It's just the summertime's just really busy for us. That's also when June and September is when we direct market our chickens, so we have to take time out to get those processed and get those delivered. And just a lot of time management, communicating with the other 2-3 people that are involved in the operation, so everybody kind of knows what they're doing and get all the work done.
Which aspects of your farm are you most passionate about?
Oh, probably being certified organic is what we're most passionate about. We've been at it for over 20 years, and just trying to take care of the land in the best way that we can, trying not to degrade it at all. Really passionate about eliminating soil erosion as much as we can. You've only got so much topsoil to work with, and in this part of the world, we've probably lost well over half of our topsoil already just from erosion, whether it be water or wind erosion, and so we really need to. We don't want to lose any more of it on our farms, and so we're trying our best to maintain it and hopefully improve it.
How do you see farming conditions changing in the future?
Unfortunately, farms will probably keep getting bigger and bigger, and rural communities will probably keep getting smaller and smaller because doesn't take as many people to operate farms as what it used to. And it'd be great if we could turn that around. I don't know if we'll be able to. You're competing against things like the markets that are out there. Federal farm programs are more conducive to larger and larger farms. Over the last decades, that's just what they've pushed for. So it's a challenge to be able to, we'd really like to revitalize rural communities, because if you don't have strong rural communities, you won't have strong, schools and churches and things like that. So trying to maintain or even repopulate our rural communities would be a fun direction to go in the future, but also a very challenging one.
Will you expand the future management plans of your farm?
We're kind of stepping out right now a little bit as far as the crop production goes. We've turned that over to the next generation, so to speak, and still more in a mentoring role and just assisting in that transition right now. But at some point we'll, fully step away from that. We'll probably maintain our livestock operation for quite a few years yet, and who knows, maybe our grandkids will be interested at some point, and maybe they'll take over that part of it. And it's hard to predict the future. You kind of, as 20 years ago, I thought, well, maybe one of my kids would take over the farm, and well, they went different directions, which is fine. And so now we've got another family that's involved in it, and whether their kids get involved or not, maybe maybe my grandkids or somebody comes back into it, or maybe somebody totally new, maybe one of the, people that we hire during the summer times, maybe they, start to fit in, and so who knows what will happen down the road.
How would you define sustainability?
Yeah, that's a good question. That's a term that's been tried to be defined for decades here. Sustainable ag's been around, probably that terminology since at least the 80s. And to me, I define it more as being able to sustain the soil, the land base. If you can, maintain or improve the soil, to sustain it for future generations. And if you can do that with limited inputs, which our inputs are relatively small compared to a conventional farming operation where they're bringing in all the fertilizer and the herbicides to grow a crop. We've improved the soil by increasing the organic matter, and hopefully we can, maintain the production on the soils that way, but it's done in a more naturally sustainable way rather than a chemicalized type of sustainability.
What things are you doing on your farm that you would describe as sustainable?
Oh, the crop rotation, again, the lack of inputs of fertilizer and herbicides, we feel is fairly sustainable. Having livestock as part of the farming operation is a key component too. We're able to take land resources that aren't conducive to row crops and use the livestock on there. We convert some of the crops to manure, which then can be hauled back out on the cropland to be used that way. Probably one of the changes we're going to make in the future, instead of maybe harvesting alfalfa and sell it, we may increase our livestock herds, that instead of growing alfalfa, we maybe for 3 years we might actually have pasture out there and just graze it off, so the manure is going right back on the soil that way, so we aren't mechanically harvesting, hauling it off, and then trying to bring manure back. And we think that's probably going to increase our organic matter in our soils in the future too. So that's probably one of the bigger changes we might make down the road.
What opportunities for farms like yours do you see arising in the future?
Well, I think there's great opportunities for organic farming and direct marketing. It's the consumers are really driving that, because they're becoming more involved in wanting to know what's in their food, and genetic engineering, they have some concerns with that. We still don't have any labeling laws. I mean, the large chemical companies have really battled any laws that have been placed on any ballot, such as California recently. And I think someday genetically engineered crops will be labeled on the consumer side, so they know what they're buying. But without that, we are labeling organic products, and so consumers, if they purchase organic, they know that they're not getting any genetically engineered products coming through that way. Most people really like there'll be more direct marketing of fruits and vegetables and meat, just because that's what people are demanding, and they're willing to pay for it. They liked having that connection with the farmer, being able to go out on the farms and see where their food's grown at. And I think that'll be a big plus. Fuel's getting so high, it really doesn't make sense to be bringing all your food from, your fruits and vegetables from California 12 months out of the year, when we can grow it right here for 6 or 8 months out of the year. And so I think some of the dynamics will change. Unfortunately, there's a lot of politics involved in it. If it was more just a free market, some of these changes would probably come about quicker, but I think they'll still be moving that direction. And like I said earlier, about 5 years ago, Steve and Shelly Lorenz joined our operation, and they came from Minnesota. They had worked Steve grew up on a farm, but he worked as a mechanic for about 15 years, and they went through a program called Farm Beginnings through the Land Stewardship Project. And after they did that, they decided they wanted to get back on a farm and wanted to move to southeast Nebraska, or northwest Missouri was kind of their preferred location. And long story short, we made a connection, and they moved down here and bought a piece of ground that my parents still own, so they had their home base. And then the plan was that Steve would work for me for a few years just on salary, and he could use our machinery to farm the ground that he had bought from my parents, and then he'd start farming all the rented ground that we had, and we'd kind of be 50-50 for a while. And then in about 10 years from the time he came, then he'd take over all the crop ground. Well, about 3 years into that, they had twin girls, so that kind of changed Shelly's somewhat her ability to work off the farm, or just the costs of it. And so we kind of looked at the situation, and we said, hey, maybe they can take over the crop side of the operation, generate more income, so Steve would be the only one having to work, and Shelly could stay home with the girls. And it kind of worked for Deb and I too. We were able to slow down a little bit and not have the day-to-day responsibility of running the crop side of the operation, and that's worked out pretty good. And we started that when I was 52, which is maybe a little bit early to start transitioning out of farming, but it's worked out pretty good, and still got a ways to go yet, but we're moved down the road where it's worked out pretty good.